Hello, my name is Christian Butts, and I am doing my presentation on kinesthetic versus visual learning. So starting off here, obviously it's good to know the definitions of each. So the first one here is the kinesthetic learning definition. And this style requires that you manipulate or touch material to learn. It says kinesthetic techniques are used in combination with visual and or auditory study techniques, producing multisensory techniques. The visual learning definition is a little bit more simple. It says a visual learning style requires that you see what you learn. That's pretty simple. So, like I said before, in simple terms, going into kinesthetic learning, basically, in its simplest form, it's a hands-on form of learning. And then visual learning is that the learner has to obviously be able to see to learn. So going over some benefits, and during my research, I had thought of some of these, but not all of them, and some of them were, it's a good learning process for me. Some of them were a surprise, some of them weren't a surprise. So first of all, the benefits of hands-on learning or kinesthetic is that it encourages students to think outside the box. This one is extremely important, especially in my generation, but also the generations coming up now. It seems like students don't have an ability to think outside the box. They don't have, nobody can come up with any original ideas. Now, obviously, that's not everybody, but a lot of students in school, they don't think outside the box. They don't come up with their own ideas. Secondly, we see that this form of learning encourages students to experiment. Other forms of learning aren't bad, but this form of learning, it teaches the student that it's okay to experiment. If something doesn't work out exactly the way that you think it might, try a different way. And really that goes back to, hey, let's think outside the box with this one. The third one down, less repetitive. Sometimes you get into, in a classroom, it's very repetitive. The teacher gets up and they're talking in front of a PowerPoint presentation, or they say, open your textbooks to this chapter, we'll go over this, we'll read this, I'll go over the main points, and it's very repetitive. We've all had teachers and classes like that, and for some people, that form of learning is the best form of learning. So it's not that form is bad or inferior as compared to kinesthetic learning, but for other types of students, kinesthetic learning isn't extremely repetitive. The student gets to see new things during each experiment, each project, and it can be extremely beneficial for different kinds of students. Fourthly, we see that it promotes engagement in the learning process, and it goes right along with the next one down, which is promotes communication with peers. Engagement and communication with other students is something that we see as kind of dropping off in some classrooms. Some teachers don't put as much of an emphasis on that as other teachers do. And unfortunately, we see it's kind of dying in some schools and some classrooms. But I believe that it's extremely important that students engage in these processes. They engage and communicate with their peers. The learning process is what it sounds like. It's a series of processes combined that the student gets to participate in. The learning process changes the mind of the student. It changes the mind in the way that the student thinks. That's what learning is. And without the ability to communicate with people and learning how to communicate, then students, who don't do that, then they're going to have a tough time when they go out into the world. So we see that this form of learning promotes engagement with the teacher, with their peers. It promotes that communication, which is extremely vital in their life then, in their life especially in the future. Next, we see the implementation of ideas. Sometimes there's a few different ways this could go, but implementation of the students' personal ideas. They think, oh man, this is a great idea. Let me experiment on that. Let me think outside the box with this. Let me put in my own ideas. Maybe it's an idea that they got from something else that they were learning, some communication with their peers, something else that they saw. I'm not sure. But they can, throughout this specific learning process of kinesthetic learning, they can implement ideas that they've seen, ideas that they've heard, their own ideas. Every student's different. Each student gets their own ideas from who knows, a million different things that they've seen, that they've heard, people that they've interacted with. They think, oh man, that's a great idea. I need to be able to do that. And this form of learning lets those students implement their ideas that they come up with into different projects, into different experiments and things like that. And then the last one there, obviously I've already talked about that. It changes the student's thought process while implementing those ideas. And that is so very extremely important to know, because all forms of learning, the end goal should be to change the way that the student thinks. Students go and they get an education because they don't have all the knowledge of everything that they're being taught. It teaches the student to change the way that they think. The learning process changes the way that these students think, and this form of learning it's perfect. It's perfect for that. Now, like I said before, it's very important to remember that not all students are going to go for this form of learning. Not go for, but this form of learning might not be the best for all students, and that's very important to keep in mind. We see the next benefits list here is the benefits of visual learning. So visual learning, in my research here, I understood what visual learning was, but this really dove a little bit deeper into it. So the first one here is it helps to store information longer than reading from a textbook. And I didn't think about it until I did research it, but for me at least, when I'm looking at something, I remember those pictures, obviously, or the video. Reading a textbook, sometimes, if we're just being honest, textbooks might not be the greatest thing in the world, it might not bring the most enthusiasm into a student's life. So those pictures, those videos, being able to see something, being able to see a teacher write something on a smartboard or a whiteboard, I remember things like that more than just, here's a textbook, read out of it. And I know a lot of other people are like that too. But we see the next one here, the second one, it aids in lesson comprehension. So kind of going back to what I said on the first one there, with something just as simple as a teacher writing maybe math equations on a whiteboard. Obviously, students are going to get more out of that than just looking at a math textbook or a digital ebook or something about math, and then the teacher says, have at it. Here's a homework assignment, here's a class assignment, complete all of this. Well, if it's something a little bit more complicated like calculus or something like that, something that not everyone's going to understand right away, then it might benefit some students for the teacher to write everything out on the whiteboard and make connections to everything. The third one down there is it drives motivation to implement what was learned in the lesson. If a student can visually see something, they can picture, and like I said, it's important to keep in mind not all students are like this, but some students can picture what they saw in their mind's eye and think, oh, that's what I learned. That's what I learned. Now I can implement that. Now I can implement that into this homework, into this assignment that I have to do, something like that. The fourth one down is visual learning helps connect what is familiar with what is unfamiliar. And realistically, this is all forms of learning. But sometimes I remember in even high school and college, I saw a picture of something or a video or a representation, an infographic or something like that. And my mind computed that infographic or picture with something that I already knew. And you could connect the dots, and that's what happens in some students' minds is they connect the dots. And that's a great form of learning for them. And then it's possibly less distracting than other forms of learning. I know that when I'm reading a textbook or doing some sort of reading for my class, I get distracted very easily. And one could argue that that is a form of visual learning as well. But when I'm just sitting there reading a textbook, I get distracted. I really do. If maybe, let's go back to the whiteboard example, the teacher's up in front of the class with the whiteboard writing everything down. I find that a little bit less distracting. Yes, the teacher's talking. Everyone might be taking notes. There could even be a video playing that you're watching as a visual aid. That to me, for me, is less distracting than having to read a textbook by myself. Everyone's different. That might be the way you learn. It might not be. So a few effective delivery techniques of these types of learning, and this can vary. There's a lot more examples, but these were the easiest ones that I could come up with. So kinesthetic might be STEM projects, science, technology, engineering, and math, those kind of projects. When I was in middle school and high school, I was part of the STEM programs. And basically with these projects, what they taught you to do was to work outside the box, obviously to think outside the box, to come up with your own ideas. But it was all hands-on. You were soldering things. You were, making popsicle stick bridges and experimenting with things, things like that. And that goes into the next one, science experiments, same type of thing. Even in English or something like that, writing poems or writing your own music, writing notes out so that you better understand it. Maybe it's designing a product or even like a 3D drawing or something like that. The student's able to design it. Maybe it's history reenactments. We all know what those are. Maybe a student learns better that way by being put into a position where they can see the perspective of the person who was in that position in the future or in the past. So those are all good examples of kinesthetic learning, hands-on learning. Visual learning might be videos. We've already kind of talked about that. Diagrams, maybe in math. Brainstorming, the teacher gets through with a video or an infographic or something like that and says, well, hey, now brainstorm this. And that's what I was talking about. In your mind's eye, you can visualize things after seeing something. The fourth one down there, images, PowerPoints, and then infographics. Those are all good examples of visual learning. So kind of wrapping it all up here, and I've reiterated most of this throughout the whole presentation, but something extremely important to remember is that all students are different. All students learn in a different way. And if you can figure out the ways that each student learns, and that's great. You can better prepare them by knowing how they learn. But something else that's very important, the third one down there, experiment with different learning styles. I find that I learn myself as kind of a teacher, that I learn how to do things by experimenting. I experiment using different styles of learning. How do you capture the attention of the student? The fourth one down there, I hadn't thought about this before, but this is something that a lot of teachers do use and should use. More teachers should use it, is they combine learning styles. You can combine these two learning styles. In our STEM programs in high school and middle school, sometimes in order for the teacher to kind of get it through to us, they would present us with pictures, a video of people who have already done the experiment, and you can picture in your mind's eye, oh yeah, I can do that. But then they present you with a problem, and then you have to find a solution to that problem. And then that's when you transition into, now it's an experiment, now it's a project, now you're hands-on learning. You can combine different learning styles. The fifth one down there, you have to remain conscious of how each learning style affects the students. Each learning style, like was said before, might be better for one student than it is for the other. And that's where you can combine the learning styles, so it's kind of getting everyone on the same page. And then lastly, know and remember the differences of each style to better equip students in the learning process. Like I said before, you can experiment. You can learn all these different ways of learning, but you have to remember how each of these works. The different examples that I gave, those are all great to be able to implement into the classroom. And like I said before, you can combine these learning styles. You can mesh them together. And then the last slide here, these are my sources. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I appreciate it.